Hello, this is Brian Selassie, the Orthodox Catholic One on YouTube. I'm going to continue on my second and third points about Isaiah 53 verse 8 in regards to the Countermissionaries' objections. The second claim they make is the word Lamo, which is used at the end of the verse of Isaiah 53:8 in the Masoretic text. They insist that it only can mean to them and never to him. So first of all, this claim is largely true. You can, my Bible software, interlinear, it's an interlinear, shows that Lamo appears 59 times in 57 verses in the Masoretic text of the Hebrew Bible, and the vast majority of them it is used in the context of plurality, or at least implied plurality. However, there are possible exceptions. The most commonly used one is a few chapters earlier in Isaiah, which reads, "Yea, he maketh a god, and worships it, and makes a graven image, and falls down thereto," or to it. And the word there for to it, or to thereto, is Lamo. And you can see it right here, Lamo, and this is the Masoretic text of it. Anyway, my 1985 Judaica Press version has, or the 1985 JPS, as it's called, translates it as follows: "He also makes a god of it, and worships it, fashions an idol and bows down to it." So you can see the to it, Lamo, is translated here in this Jewish translation as to it, not to them. Most English translations agree with this, as to it, that is. However, there are some Jewish translations that insist that it should be translated to them. And the reasoning is they suggest the person is bowing to both the image and the god. However, the earlier part of the sentence already addresses the person worshiping the god itself, which, I mean, is also the word for bowing. Another word for bowing, I should say. It's used right here. It's Vayishatach-hu, or something approximately that. Anyway, so they're already referencing worshiping this particular deity. The word there is el, and then it uses the word for worship or reverence, or however you want to translate that word. So anyway, it would seem fairly redundant in itself. The verse seems pretty redundant. It's like two sentences, but kind of repeat themselves using different words. But anyway, it seems extremely extra redundant to say it's saying to them. But anyway, counter-missionaries sometimes appeal to what the Septuagint says for this translation. For the rare instance when a counter-missionary actually cares what the Septuagint says, because the Orthodox Jewish position is that the Septuagint is garbage. They don't trust it. They believe the Masoretic text doesn't make any mistakes, and if there's any mistakes in the Masoretic text, it's because the sacred writer made that mistake and didn't know better. That's the position. However, the Septuagint varies significantly in this verse of Isaiah 44 verse 15. Instead of having almost two redundant sentences about making an image and worshiping, or making a god and worshiping it, and then making an image and bowing down to it, it says in the Septuagint, and here's the translation, you could find it for yourself, but the rest they fashioned into gods, and they did obeisance to them, which makes the idol makers plural, whereas the Masoretic text has the singular, and also has the deities as plural, whereas the Masoretic text has a god, and then it omits the second part about making an image and bowing down to it. It could simply just be summing up the whole sentence, but it looks like it's just having this first half. So the point of this is that it makes the counter-missionaries' appeal to the Septuagint absolutely useless, since it's not even quoting this second half of the sentence. Anyway, the Septuagint, if we were to go on back to the Septuagint in Isaiah 53, which is the main topic, it mentions the word death there, which fits the context perfectly of Isaiah 53:8. Since let's go back to this translation, talking about a lamb led to the slaughter, or a sheep who that is mute before the shears, referring to it being killed, and then it's cut off from the land of the living. And and then it has the next verse, verse 9, as having a grave and a tomb, or kinds of death, and so on. So its context is death. So it would make sense. So the Septuagint says thanaton. Incidentally, there's very little difference between the word lamo, which is the Hebrew word used for death in this, or not death, to them or to him in the sentence, and the word in the Hebrew word for death, I think it's going to be lamot, and the only difference is the end of the word will have a tau. I don't know why I didn't add it, but it's going to have a tau after the vav. Incidentally, the vav and the tau look very alike in the older Hebrew. The only difference is that the tav has an extra stroke at the end. But anyway, here's what the Septuagint reads: Apoton anomion to lau mo ichathi is thanatun. The word thanaton, of course, thanatos refers to death. He was led to death on account of the acts of the lawlessness of my people. It doesn't read that way directly. I mean, they kind of rearranged the word order in this translation, but that's what it says. The last word is thanaton, death, or lamot. Or if we were to go by translations within modern Judaism today, following the Masoretic text, we have the 1985 JPS, which I'm using, and it reads, "For he was cut off from the land of the living through the sin of my people, who deserved the punishment," showing that he received what they deserved. So anyway, that's their second claim. Let's go on to the third claim that they make about the phrase "land of the living." They insist that it's a translation, that it's an expression for the term, or term for the land of Israel, which is, I'll show you. You can't really prove it based on any other instance within the Hebrew Bible. So anyway, this is an assertion they cannot make. I mean, they make, but they cannot prove based on the context. They just fit it into in order to try to make it part of the people of Israel. Anyway, the most obvious meaning is that it is an expression of death, which Isaiah 53 is full of, just as I mentioned, just previous verse and the verse after. It's not talking about the deportation, exile, or anything like that from the land of Israel. In fact, verse 7 says, "As a lamb led to the slaughter," and verse 9, "to the grave, to the wicked, to the rich's tomb." In fact, verse 8 in the Septuagint explicitly uses the Greek word for death, as I mentioned. Other than being an expression for life and death, it is used for the temple area. Let's look at several instances where the land of the living is used. The only other instance in the book of Isaiah is Isaiah 38, verse 11, the only other time where the expression is used. And it says, "I said, I shall not see Yah, not even Yah, in the land of the living," Yah referring to God, "in the land of the living," and the word for land in the land of the living is Be'eretz Chaim. "I shall behold no man no more with the inhabitants of the world." And you can see in red the phrase "in the land of the living" in Hebrew, Be'eretz Chaim, HaChaim, actually. The context is the king of Judah, Hezekiah, remembering when he was sick and persecuted, fearing for his life. That the previous verse even mentions that he feared he would wind up in the netherworld, Sheol. The land of the living here seems to just be an expression for life, or rather, how he's going to die. Though possibly also the temple, since the poem ends in verse 20 with, "This is why we offer up music all the days of our lives at the house of God." House of God being an expression for the temple. And anyway, you could see later on in the Psalms that house of the Lord and the land of the living may be an expression for the temple. Regardless, it is an expression of physical death here in Isaiah 38:11, and that's the most apparent, and you wouldn't come to the conclusion it's talking about the land of Israel. Anyway, my second example is similar to Isaiah 53. It's found in Jeremiah 11:19, where the prophet Jeremiah talks about a conspiracy by the people of, I think it's called Anathoth, trying to kill him. here's what the passage reads. But I was like a docile lamb that is led to the slaughter, and I knew not what they had devised, that they had devised devices against me. Let us destroy the tree with the fruit thereof, and let us cut him off from the land of the living. Maketh Hayim. This is his name, that his name may no more remembered. May be no more remembered, that is. That his name may be no more remembered. Here's the Masoretic text. So anyway, this was the plot by the people to kill the prophet. The mention of the land led to the slaughter, destroying the tree, the cutting from the land of the living, and not letting his name remembered, all refer to death. And have nothing to do with being deported from the land of Israel. Interesting, both these passages on Isaiah 53 mention a lamb led to the slaughter and being cut off from the land of the living. Me'eretz Chaim, verse 15 mentions the house of God, but the land of the living does not seem to refer to the temple at all. This is no reason why we should not. There is no reason why we should not think that this is referring to just physical death. Anyway, the parallel between this shows that Isaiah, the prophet, was persecuted, and that they'll say, well, Countermissionaries will argue, well, Israel was persecuted. We were like a docile lamb led to the slaughter. We were cut off from the land of the living. But the thing right here is it has a person, the prophet, Jeremiah, being the land led to the slaughter, being cut off from the land of the living, being persecuted. So Christians will say, well, that's Jesus. Analogous, that is in Isaiah 53. So it can actually be one physical person. So anyway, my third example is from the book of Job, where it's talking about wisdom, where it can be found. The point is, it can be found nowhere on the land of the earth, or as it says, in the land of the living. Job 28 was not talking about Israel. The most natural understanding is that it cannot be found among living humans. And here's what it says. Man knoweth not the price thereof, referring to wisdom. Neither can it be found in the land of the living. And right here it says, Be'eretz ha'chayim. Again, wisdom cannot be found on earth. It only can be found from God. Here's a translation of the Masoretic text, or rather the Masoretic text itself. The closest I've seen a verse referring to the land of Israel, coming to calling the land of Israel the land of the living, is found in the Psalms, where it's the temple, not all of Israel's land, that is called the land of the living. Here's one example, Psalm 27, verse 13. If I had not believed to look on the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living, Be'eretz Hayim. We know that Psalm 27, verse 13 is referring to the area of the temple, because Psalm 27, verse 4, the psalmist says that I may dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life. And it goes on to visit early in his temple. In fact, the Jewish Study Bible for this verse notes that the land of the living is a contrast with the land of the dead, and is a metaphor for the temple. Next one we have is Psalm 52, verse 7, where it says, God will likewise break thee forever. He will take thee up, pluck thee out of thy tent, and root thee out of the land of the living. And that's the expression there is Me'eretz Hayim. And then it says Selah, which means, that's a very debated word itself. It could mean shout, be silent forever. Anyway, here's the Masoretic text. Verse 10 of this psalm, which I didn't read from, the psalmist contrasts the person who is rooted from the land of the living with himself, who is, quote, like a thriving tree in the house of God. God's house being a common term in the Hebrew Bible for the temple. The verses, that is verse 7 and verse 10, correspond to each other. One person in one verse is rooted from the land of the living, and the other is thriving in God's house. Verse 10, the JSB notes, Jewish Study Bible, notes that the olive tree is a metaphor used for the olive oil used in the temple, And verse 10, it is uncertain, this is what the note says, it is uncertain if the psalmist is a religious official in the temple, God's house, or is a lay Israelite who enjoys the God's proximity at the temple. And then it refers to this verse. And then, okay, it seems most likely that land of the living here is just an expression for living, since it's paralleled with your tent. Since it's kind of pejorative in the verse 7. God lies break thee, he will take thee, he will pluck thee out of your tent and root thee out of the land of the living. So it's probably not referring to the temple in this verse, but it's definitely is referring to life. He's going to break you, pluck thee, and so on. You're dead, pretty much, in that verse. Here's what Psalm 119 verse 9 says about the phrase land of the living. It actually uses the word lands of the living, and this time it actually has the plural form, be'aretzot hachayim. Then you have the word the there in the plural ot. Anyway, this is plainly an expression of death as seen in the previous verse. For thou hast delivered my soul from death. That's verse 116 verse 8. Mine eyes from tears and my feet from stumbling. In verse 8, the psalmist was at the risk of death and stumbling, not be able to walk. Now he can walk, as the verse says, I shall walk before the Lord in the land of the living. So now he can walk, which is just an expression for keeping God's commandments, serving him, and so on. The lands of the living here may be associated with the temple, since the psalmist goes on and talks about the idea of giving sacrifices to God in the Jerusalem temple in verse 19. However, I mean, that might not be the case. Most apparent one is that it's just an expression for life, land of the living, the lands of the living. Yeah, sometimes the Bible just throws a plural in there. For instance, with the word olam, sometimes it says olam im. It just makes it forever instead of forever. But anyway, the last instance in the Psalms that I found that uses the word phrase land of the living is Psalm 142 verse 6, which states, I have cried unto thee, O Lord. I have said, thou art my refuge, my portion in the land of the living. And then it says, Be'eretz hachayim. Psalm 142 is another psalm about being persecuted, about persecution at the risk of death, just as many of the previous examples were. Verse 5 states, there is no one that cares for my life. That's the previous verse to this, the context of that verse. And it's just, so here it is just an expression for life on earth, that is in the land of the living. It's just an expression for living, just living on earth, as opposed to being buried and dead in the land of the dead. Finally, the phrase the land of the living is used several times in the book of Ezekiel. It's used just about more than any other book in the Hebrew Bible, and more than any book. Half the instances occurs in the book of Ezekiel. The first one occurs in Ezekiel 26 verse 20, and it starts off, then I will bring thee down with them that descend into the pit, to the people of old time. I will make thee to dwell in the nether parts of the earth, like the places that are desolate of old, with them that go down to the pit, that thou be not inhabited, and I will set glory in the land of the living. This phrase, I will set glory, is debated. That translation is debated. But anyway, it says in the land of the living, Be'eretz Hayim, and then here's the Masoretic text. So anyway, that debated part, which reads right here, Venatani Tzuvi, is taken from this translation I'm using right here was actually the older JPS. I think it's like 1912 or some ridiculous old year, about 100 years ago, and is widely debated by English. The translation is widely debated by the English translations and even by Jews. The New Jewish Translation, the JPS translation, Judaica Press, which is found in the Jewish Study Bible. Actually, this is 1985, I should say. It says the following, and shall not radiate splendor in the land of the living. So referring to the town as no longer being able to radiate splendor in the land of the living, because it will be put out. But then also the JPS mentions that the Hebrew is uncertain, according to them. Now the Jewish commentator Rashi, which is 13th century France, takes the verse as being positive and says it's as if God said, "And I shall bestow beauty upon Jerusalem." He interprets the land of the living as being Jerusalem. It's absurd because it's completely out of context with the tone of the passage, which has nothing to do with Tyre, which has nothing to do with anything but Tyre, but with Tyre concerning its demise. It's full of threats. If you actually read the passage of Ezekiel 26, verse 20, there's threats before the verse, there's threats after the verse. So there's no reason why he would just mention the beauty of Israel. He's talking about destroying a city, Tyre. It's the whole passage. You would never naturally think that is what it says. But anyway, the Septuagint here translates this debatable phrase, "Venatanti tzvi be'eret chayim," as not rise upon a land of life, which means you're not going to come back to life. You're gone. Some say this is sort of like referring to Tammuz and Ishtar, the Babylonian myth. God's kind of mocking it, saying that's not happening to you. You're not coming back. You're dead. Anyway, the next instance, actually the final occurrence of the phrase "in the land of the living," occurs in Ezekiel 32, which is very obvious that it's simply talking about death, killing the nations, or destroying them, the pagan nations, with the mention of all this talk of the pit, the grave, sword, death. Anyway, here's what it says. "Ashur is there and all her company, their graves are around about them." And this is God referring to Egypt, threatening Egypt. "All of them slain, fallen by the sword, whose graves are set in the uttermost parts of the pit. And her company is round about her grave, all of them slain, fallen by the sword, who caused terror in the land of the living. Be'eret Hayim, there is Elam. And all her multitude round about her grave, all of them slain, fallen by the sword, who have gone down uncircumcised into the nether parts of the world, who caused their terror in the land of the living. Be'eret Hayim, but they have borne their shame with them that go down to the pit. They have set their bed in the midst of the slain, with all her multitude. Her grave are round about them, all of them uncircumcised, slain by the sword, because the terror was caused in the land of the living. Be'eret Hayim, yet have they borne their shame with them that go down to the pit. They are put in the midst of them that are slain. There is Meshach, Tubal, Meshech, I should say, Tubal, and all their multitude, and all her multitude. Her graves are round about them, all of them uncircumcised, slain by the sword, because they caused their terror in the land of the living. Be'eret Chayim, and they that are inferior to the uncircumcised shall not lie with the mighty that are gone down to the netherworld with their weapons of war, whose swords are lain under their heads, and whose iniquities are upon their bones. Because the terror of the mighty was in the land of the living, Be'eret Chayim, but thou in the midst of the uncircumcised shalt be broken and alive, even. And then anyway, it keeps going on and on and on. And finally God says, "For I have put my terror in the land of the living, Be'eret Chayim, and he shall be laid in the midst of the uncircumcised with them that are slain by the sword. Even Pharaoh and all his multitudes, says the Lord God." That's what Ezekiel says. So, in conclusion, the phrase "in the land of the living" never anywhere in the Hebrew Bible refers to the land of Israel. It's purely the Countermissionaries' conjecture and Rashi's conjecture that it is an expression for Israel. It's simply the most obvious, apparent in context interpretation is it's just referring to physical death, with the exception of like the Psalm, where it's an expression for the temple, the area of the temple. So anyway, this is Berhane Selassie answering the Countermissionaries' objections and points of Isaiah 53 and why they think it's the nation of Israel as opposed to Jesus. Anyway, this is Berhane Selassie, the Orthodox Catholic one.